Meeting of the Planning Commission to order this September 4th, 2019. Will staff call roll, please?
Connie Coleman Lackady. Don Daniels.
Here.
James Guerrero.
Here.
Nancy Hudson Eccles is excused. Ryan Pearson.
Here.
Paul Wegman.
Present.
And Christopher Weber.
Here.
You have quorum.
Thank you. Before us, we have the minutes of August 21st, 2019. I'm looking for a motion.
Make a motion.
Mr. Pearson,
Second.
second by Connie. Any changes or corrections? Hearing or
Is this for
seeing?
the minutes?
Yes.
You got my name taken off there, right? Because whoever answered present for me at the last meeting was somebody, not me.
I apologize then.
I wasn't here at last meeting. I was fishing.
So there is a correction to the minutes. Mr. Wegman was not present at last.
Hopefully I was
meeting.
excused.
Yes, you were. Any other corrections or changes? So all those with the changes as Mr. Wegman presented, all the rest, all those in favor by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, it passes with the correction. Okay, any changes to our agenda tonight by staff? No, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Next on the agenda is the public comments. And if you are here tonight in regarding to the public hearing, we'll ask you at that time if you wish to speak. But anyone else in the audience at this time wish to speak in public comment? Any topic, anything at all, you're more than welcome to speak to the commissioners. Nothing tonight, Flynn? Hearing or seeing none at this time, we'll close the public comment. We'll move to number 6, unfinished business with the Lakewood Municipal Development Code.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tiffany Spear. Good evening, everyone. So first of all, there is tonight a public hearing that you're about to hold on 18A, and you have in your packets tonight an updated version of the full code with some additions and edits that happened since the last time you saw the package. Then there is also in front of you in hard copy an errata sheet. This is an error on staff's part to include some of the changes that were talked about with stakeholders for 18A 40.040, the commercial and industrial use table, and then 18A 40.080, health and social services table. All of this relates to what's permitted or conditionally allowed or prohibited within the industrial business park. So that is there in front of you, and that will be incorporated into the full package for your next meeting. But that was just something that should have been in there, and we missed it. So once more, for the benefit of anyone who doesn't already know this, the scope of this update is the full Title 18A, which is the Land Use and Development Code for the city, but there's also some changes that have been proposed for Title 3, Title 12, and Title 17, all related to the 18A update. So those are incorporated into your package now. This is just a quick table comparison between the current and the proposed new code chapters. Some of them have the same names, but there are changes in every single chapter, and there are new chapters in 18A as proposed to you. These have been covered in a number of Planning Commission meetings. There's been a number of stakeholder outreach meetings as well. It's been online, I want to say since at least January of this year at lakewood18a.org, and that continues to be updated as changes are made. This table you saw in the last meeting, it's just here again for a reminder of where substantive changes are suggested. This may well miss some of the things that you have found, and apologies if that's the case, but it's probably true. But you'll see substantive changes in 18A 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and 80. And then there's a couple of things toward the end of the title. 18A 95 is the wireless service facilities, and that is an entirely new chapter, but it is incorporating the interim regulations that the council adopted earlier this year. And then 18A 100 is the sign code that was already adopted by council, and we're simply dropping it into 18A. So the errata sheet, just quickly for everyone's benefit, on the commercial and industrial uses, this is just a portion of that full table, but this is showing you where it was intended to have these uses listed as either permitted or conditionally permitted or prohibited. And so this, again, will be dropped into the full package by next time. And then the following one is for the health and social services use table, same idea. There were several that were just left off in error by staff. So all of these, again, will be incorporated into the full package. Where we sit schedule-wise is tonight is a public hearing for Title 18A and the rest of the chapters up for amendment. You are scheduled for simply a discussion at your next meeting on September 18th. And then if you're ready to, certainly don't need to push you or anything, but if you're ready, October 2nd would be a day for action. And then if that happens, the council is currently scheduled to begin discussion about 18A on October 14th and then move forward with their consideration for as long as it may take. So that's all I had to say regarding 18A this evening, and I think you're about to have your public hearing.
Great. Thank you. So at this time, we'll open up the public hearing for the Lakewood Municipal Code, Development Code, Title 18A. And we'll open it up for, I have two individuals that have signed up to speak before us. And I'll start off with Tim Pryor.
Thank you. I'm Tim Purrier. I'm a resident of Tacoma, but I maintain my corporate office here at Lakewood at the Lakewood Industrial Park. As you're probably all aware, the Lakewood Industrial Park is the largest developed property currently in the IBP zone. As such, I've been tracking the transition of the current code into the new table format very closely. It's a tedious job of lots and lots of details. And as you saw from the errata sheet, even best efforts, there's a few things that slip through. And, but I think we are getting the specific IBP zone to a very good conversion from the old zone. I'm feeling very comfortable with it. And I do want to say that the current IBP zone as drafted has been working for the Lakewood Industrial Park. Transitioning into an easier to read format is a good thing. We're all in support of that. Obviously the devil's in the details, but I just want to say Tiffany and Dave are working very hard to try to get their hand on those details, and we're very much in support of the project, that they're the process that they're working through right now. And I think once all the pain of getting this done is complete, this is going to be an improvement for both the staff and the people that want to develop here in the city. With that, there's still a few little items that we're talking about in the IBP zone. A couple little things like 2 lines are still left out of the errata dealing with manufacturing and assembly in the medium and heavy category. They got the light line in, but they didn't get the medium and heavy in, and so that's going to be another change for you, I think. Then there's a couple uses that we're still talking about whether it was appropriately transferred to the new form, but I'm sure we'll get to the bottom of those very quickly. The last thing I wanted to say is that one of the other sections I've looked at with some detail is the new lighting requirement required by the military, by the Air Force Base. It's a different concept. I've never really seen it before, and to try to get a feel for how that works, I have asked my lighting contractor, designer, whatever you want to call them, to take a look at it, see if he's familiar with this new concept of bug, which is how the light shines on the ground and not in the sky, and how many light fixtures are currently available that meet that requirement, and how that translates on a one-for-one basis of kind of how we're set up right now. If there's just kind of give us a real world view of how easy it would be to change a light fixture in the park. The little things that you do every day, kind of. Because we want to make sure that we stay in compliance with the codes of the city. So hopefully next week I'll have his comments back. If there's something material, I'll send that in writing so that everybody can see it. But my first read through, I think if I understood it correctly, I think it's something that'll work as the current lighting works. Just make sure everybody's comfortable that it's being done correctly. So with that, I'd just like to say that Northwest Building, the owner of the Lakewood Industrial Park, is in favor of this proposed change. There's a lot of detail in it, and I do not envy this council getting their hands around everything else, because I've been focused just on this one little section of the zone, and it's a handful. But I think in the long run, it'll be beneficial to the city. So thank you for your effort. And if you have any questions about what I've looked at, I'm more than happy to answer any questions. But that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Appreciate it. Mr. Bush, Greg.
Good evening. My name is Gregory Bush. I'm with Wireless Policy Group here tonight on behalf of AT&T. Our offices are in Issaquah. Wireless Policy Groups, not AT&T's. And you may not recognize me from the last two hearings because I now have these spiffy glasses. So I'd like to thank the Commission for the opportunity to speak and thank staff and the Commission for consideration of AT&T's comments. We ask tonight that the Commission reconsider one of AT&T's comments, previous comment, because in this instance, we believe it's inconsistent with federal law. And this is page 409 of 464, section 18A 050.90 D11. I think that's the citation. This is under the priority of locations section. So D11 states it requires the applicant to show that co-locations for wireless facilities, WCF, they're more preferred, you go in the more preferred zones, and that they be located outside of single-family residences, and we have to show that the locations outside of the single-family residence has to be used before we go inside the single-family residence. This is typical for treating wireless facilities. What's not typical is when the additional language states that technologies that cannot be, we must also show that technologies cannot be modified to outside of the zone to not go inside the single-family zone. And this is contrary to federal law in the New York SMSA Limited Partnership versus Town of Clarkstown. The rule in that case is that federal law preempts local jurisdiction deciding on which technology to use. So when a local jurisdiction says you must use a specific technology or you have to show that a particular technology doesn't work, then that's treading on federal law. And AT&T suggests removing the language at the very end of that clause, stating that other technology has to be shown that other technology can't be applied to the tower before going in the single-family zone. So thank you for the opportunity to comment. I'm available for questions if you have any.
Good. Thank you. Appreciate your comments as well. Anyone else? Mr. Spieth.
Glenn Spieth, Lakewood. In looking over the commercial and industrial uses, I'm confused. I've had an antique shop in Lakewood for 42 years. It looks like I'm gonna have to change the name to Museum Antiques Artisan Shop. Used material or junk shop, which is usually the license category I'm in, is, well, used material, I guess, is on the thing, but that's not in my zoning because I'm NC2. It's just kind of confusing. The Lakewood Museum isn't on this either. I think the zoning there is NC2. So what do we do? I don't plan on changing personally myself. However, even used material or used equipment doesn't seem to be very valid because I've got a lot of dinosaur bones that are 160 million years old. I've got Neanderthal tools, which are 50,000 years old. I've got Neolithic tools that are 13,000 plus years old. Native American artifacts, etc. They're all thousands of years old, pre-Columbian, a couple of thousand years old. Roman, Greek, Egyptian, Babylonian. All those things are thousands of years old, and I guess they're considered used. The dinosaur quit using their bones millions of years ago. But, so I have a little bit of confusion. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no one else in the audience at this time. Any questions for the commissioners? Anything? We did have a recommendation that we hold over the public hearing until September 18th for any written or additional verbal comments, to hold the public hearing open. Any objections?
You need a motion to that effect?
We don't need a motion to hold it over to the 18th.
If you want to have a motion, you can, but I don't think it's necessary.
It just, I'm just trying to ask if that is approval.
You have people saying there's going to send some more info, so.
Yeah. So is that in pretty much agreeance at this time?
Leaving it open-ended, I don't think a motion's necessary.
Right. So, Mr. Buer, you,
Well, a couple of things. We've got a list of questions and comments that Mr. Guerrero has provided. We will come back with answers to those questions. We'll also do some research on the wireless service issue that's come forward. We will be meeting with Mr. Perrier one more time to see if we can't resolve our remaining issues there. We also have a meeting coming up on Friday to talk with a major commercial retailer in Lakewood to assure him on their partnership that what is being proposed is going to work. I'm not anticipating any significant issues. And then we'll address Mr. Spee's comments. So we'll come back hopefully with answers to those questions. You can take a look at them. And then you can have further discussion and deliberation if you'd like. And you can continue the public hearing at that point or close it and then move forward with action if that's your desire. So it's pretty open-ended at this stage, but we have more homework to do at this point. And as you can tell from the testimony, there's lots and lots of little details that are contained in here. And since we've met last time, I know that I have personally spent a lot of time on the administrative section, just kind of cleaning up the permitting process. So that's in pretty good shape, but we need to go back and take a look at some of the tables and perhaps provide clarification what the intent is with some of these changes.
good. So seeing that the fellow commissioners are pretty much in agreement, we will have a continuance of the public hearing of the Lakewood Municipal Development Code Title 18A until the September 18th in conclusion. So any written or verbal comments on September 18th will be accepted under the public hearing at that time. Okay, moving on. We can go to the review of the Lakewood's residential densities. Here.
Yay. I think this stuff is interesting. I don't know if you do, but we'll see. All right, so cast your mind back, if you will. Earlier this year, we talked in, remember the umbrella of state law, regional stuff, countywide stuff, city stuff. Kind of get your mind into that. Part of what we're going to be talking about is how all of those things now play into the zoning and land use designations within the city of Lakewood. And one of the things that the city council has asked be done in conjunction with or to prepare for the 2020 Comprehensive Plan Amendment docket is to take a look at what has happened over time in Lakewood's residential zones and the density and vacancy that might be left in all of those zones to see if it may be appropriate to rezone some or all or change the densities within a zone for residential development within the city, which is basically what this says. I'm going to step over here really quickly. You've all seen these maps before, but there's, can you see that okay on your screens? Are you all right? Okay. So for the benefit of the audience, you've got it in hard copy and then up on the screen. There are two maps that the City of Lakewood maintains about land use. This first one is called the Future Land Use Map. This is the one that is the land use designations. And if you remember, we talked about how within each one of these designations, there may be multiple zones. So on this one, you'll see all of the yellow. That's considered, the brighter yellow is single family, for instance, and then the pale yellow is residential estate. If I jump forward to now the zoning map, you will see that within that yellow, there's actually a number of yellow zones. So there's residential 1, 2, 3, and 4. But then there's also multifamily, mixed residential. There's a number of other zones as well. So again, if you go back to the future land use map, there's what, 10 or 11 there. If you go down to the zoning map, there's a number more because there's multiple zones within many of the designations. So in any event, all of this is tracked and kept up to date ultimately by the City Council, but it's based on the city's comprehensive plan. And then there's periodic updates to this as time goes by. And again, what the City Council wanted to get information about is how has development historically and how is it happening now within the residential zones. So just very basic information about each of the designations and the zones within them, how many acres there are of that type of designation or zone, and then the percentage of the total residential acreage, the maximum density that's possible within each one of these zones, and then the minimum lot size. And so if you were to walk through this table, hopefully it's pretty self-explanatory, but a couple of high-level points. Within single family, you'll see there's R3 and R4. R3 is by far the biggest percentage of the residential zones within the city. It is the one that is almost 5 units per acre, about 7,500 square feet per lot, and it's intended to be single-family detached. But then you'll see there's all of these other designations and zones with varying amounts of acreage within the city, various maximum densities. As you can anticipate, the multifamily and the high density is where you see more units per acre than you would in the residential estate, for instance. One thing that's calculated a little bit differently within the Air Corridor 1 and 2 zones, which is over in the eastern part of the city and is close to the McChord Air Force Base, that 25 or 50 persons per acre calculation on density is based on the compatibility use zone report and the requirements therein about how many people can be in that area at any one time for safety reasons. So any questions on this information? Just kind of orienting you to each one of those zones and designations. Going back to the Growth Management Act, on the right-hand side, you'll see that graphic, which hopefully helps explain this perhaps better than the text does. But growth management within the state is the cities are considered the primary place where new growth happens. It's the urban incorporated area. Then the green that you see on that graphic is the unincorporated urban area. So out in Pierce County, you have parts of it that are cities, you have parts that are not city but are urban, and then you have parts that are not city and they're not urban either, they're the rural stuff. So Mount Rainier would be the most obvious example, but there's resource lands, agricultural lands where development is not anticipated. They are there and are intended to be maintained as they are, basically in perpetuity. And the idea is as time goes by, growth is going to happen in the cities primarily, but also then in that urban unincorporated area. And over time, cities will either annex parts of that. So for instance, much of Parkland and Spanaway is considered an annexation area for the city of Tacoma. And then you have potential incorporations as well. So for instance, this fall, there's going to be a vote on whether the city of Spanaway is actually going to happen or not. So we'll see how that goes. So within that framework of the cities, the urban area that's unincorporated, and then rural areas, Lakewood obviously is a city. And within that, there are allocations of growth, which happen both by the state through the Office of Financial Management. So on a periodic basis, that office calculates anticipated people, whether it's births within the state already or if it's people coming in from other areas. And then there's also the Puget Sound Regional Council's allocations and projections for both jobs and people. And those things, through that umbrella structure we talked about in the past, trickle down eventually to the city of Lakewood. The Pierce County group overall, all of the cities in the county will every once in a while get those allocations, and then they negotiate essentially how much specific growth goes into each jurisdiction. So the most recent time that happened was in 2017, and the city of Lakewood has a certain number of people and a certain number of jobs that they are now targeted to absorb between now and 2030. Within the next couple of years, they're going to be updating that and updating the horizon that Lakewood would be planning to. So that's the one side of it, where you get overtime, jobs and people are assigned to the various jurisdictions. The Buildable Lands Report is one tool that's used under Growth Management Act to track how a city or a county is doing with absorbing that growth. So there's two pieces to that. The Buildable Lands Report, first question is, the Growth Management Act says this is where you're growing by this much, and cities you're supposed to grow the most. Does, in our case, Lakewood's comprehensive plan and development regulations, are they consistent with that concept? Meaning there is room within the zoning and the development regs to grow over time for this anticipated amount of people or jobs. And then the second question in the Buildable Lands Report is, okay, it's all fine and good on paper, is this actually happening in the jurisdiction? And so they track permit activity, they track how land is being used and how dense it's being used over time, to see if the actual on-the-ground activity is consistent with what's in the Comprehensive Plan and Development Code. So here's some numbers for you. On top, you'll see out of that last ordinance where the county and the city agreed to the population and translating that into housing units, and then employment or the number of jobs that needed to be planned for in Lakewood. So if you look at the first column there, the population in 2008, was estimated at 58,780. The horizon that the city is currently planning toward is 2030, and that would be to 72,000 people, or a change of 13,220 people. The second column is the housing units, and it's roughly a little over 2 people per housing unit is the kind of the standard. That's why you see the population of 58,780 translating into 25,900 units. So that's the 2008 number of housing units. 2030, the number of housing units is about 34,285, which is a change or an increase in units that the city needs to plan for and realize about 8,400 units over that time. Same concept applies with employment. It's a little more clear-cut, though. It's just simply the number of jobs. So in 2008, there was an estimated little over 29,000 jobs. By 2030, the idea was to get to about 38,500, or an increase of about 9,200 jobs, 9,300. So that's the target. Those are the things that the city is currently planning toward for the year 2030. And again, in a couple of years, this ordinance will be updated. The horizon that the city has to plan to will change, and those numbers will change as well. The second half of the slide is information that came out of past buildable lands reports. So again, this is the report that says, is the city planning like it's supposed to under the law on its paper? And the second question is the city building out like its own plan says it's going to on paper? So there's 3 reports listed, one all the way back to 2002. The second one was 2007, and then there was one done in 2014. What you'll see under employment at the very bottom row there is a correction that Lakewood commissioned through Burke Consultants, because there were some errors and differences in the way jobs were calculated by the county versus the city. So you'll see that there's about a 5,000 job swing actually between what the county said Lakewood had and what Burke was showing that the city had. But to jump back up into housing units, what you'll see there is in the 2002 report, there was a need for 8,866 houses. The capacity was a little under that, about 600 below. By 2007, that trend had changed. Lakewood was needing 6,865. The capacity within the city's zones was for about 9,300, so there was a excess, if you will, of capacity for housing units within the city limits. By 2014, that had evened out a little bit, but still there was excess capacity of about 1,354 housing units. So if someone were to ask you, is Lakewood planning for, does it have the capacity for the people that are supposed to be coming here, the answer is yes, under the land use analysis here. Jobs, you'll see the same thing, but what you'll notice is, again, between 2014's outcome from Pierce County and then the Burke analysis, the city's position is that there is actually an excess of jobs as well. So there's also the sufficient planning is going on for employment within Lakewood city limits. Does that make sense? Are we all following along? Okay. Please stop me if I'm going too fast. Jump from those past billable lands reports that went through 2014 to last year's downtown plan. And so in addition to all of those things that had been concluded in the 2014 buildable lands report, now we have this increase in both housing and jobs within the downtown subarea. And so here you'll see there's a significant anticipated growth of housing units, namely about 2257 multifamily of some kind units within the area. And then in terms of jobs, the thought was within the downtown area, most of the new 3 million square feet of commercial space would locate within downtown, and that translates into almost 7,400 jobs. So again, there's significant growth being targeted specifically now within this part of the part of the city, but what that also does is just continue to reinforce the fact that Lakewood does have the capacity and is complying with GMA and is complying with those population assignments by the county every time that happens. Now we look at PSRC and what's going on with the Vision 2050 document. Within Vision 2050, and we talked about this 2 meetings ago, if not last meeting, there is an additional forecast now through 2050 of almost 2 million people coming to live and almost, 1.2 million jobs. And that is a total number for all 4 of the counties within Puget Sound Regional Council's area, so Snohomish, King, Kitsap, and Pierce. Within Lakewood's share of that, it is roughly 1/3 of that 28 to 29% population, or 1/3 of that 85,000 to 101,000 people. All of the core cities, which includes Lakewood within Pierce County, the total all of them are supposed to absorb that 85 to 101. So when the sausage making happens for that next ordinance that says, City of Lakewood, you will take these many people and this many jobs, that'll get hammered out. But that's the total that will be kind of the subject of discussion. And then Lakewood would also be taking 1/3 to 1/4 of the employment, which is another 1/3 or 1/4 of 44,000. So when that ordinance comes out, there'll be a new horizon to plan for, and there'll be new numbers for Lakewood to plan for. But as it sits, under the Buildable Lands Report information, under the current zoning, under historical data, Lakewood has enough capacity for both people and jobs according to the Growth Management Act, ultimately. So now we get back to the question that was asked by the council. What has been going on with residential activity within all of the zones historically, and what, if any, needs to be changed within the residential zoning scheme for the city in order to make sure we're densifying like we're supposed to. This data is information now since 2014. So since that last Buildable Lands Report was issued, this is permit activity that's occurred within the city. And across the top, you'll see Air Corridor 2, there's been activity. I'm sorry, Dave, what is ARC again, that zone name? Thank you. Residential 1, 2, 3, and 4, multifamily 1 and 2, mixed residential 2, and neighborhood commercial 2. Those are the zones where there has been new housing units constructed in whatever number. And so that's basically laying that out for the council to see and for you to see. The apartments, I can't give you exact numbers on those ones that happen in MF1, 2, MR2, and NC2. So what that is saying to you is, for instance, under MF1, there was one apartment complex within that zone with at least 5 units. It's probably considerably more, but just the way the data came to me, that's the best I could do there. But you see that there was one apartment complex in MF1, one in MF2. There were 5 units in MR2 as one development, and then there were 2 others that had at least 5 units, but probably more. So that's how to read that information. So here's where the rubber meets the road. Taking a look then one more time at the different designations, the different zones within each designation, and all of that data we kind of talked about before, which is the lot size, how many units per acre, that kind of stuff. This now includes also exactly how many units are within each one of those zones. So that third column over, which at the bottom says 23,548, those are the actual dwelling units within the city of Lakewood as of now. The number of acres that are consumed by each one of these zones is next. The vacant acreage within each one of those zones follows. So you'll see, for instance, under residential estate, R1 zone, there's a little over 364 acres of that zone within the city. How much of that is vacant right now is only 14, little over 14 acres. Within the single-family zone, there's almost 2,236 acres. 76 acres of that is currently vacant. That makes sense. Then we get over into the densities. What you see on the third from the right column is the maximum density under code that could be built within any particular zone. So again, at the top, R1, the maximum number of units per acre within that zone is set at 1.45. If you jump one more column over, what's actually built out there in that R1 zone is at about 1.28 units per acre. And so the final column, those bright yellow numbers, that is the percentage of the maximum density possible within each one of these zones, how much it's been built out to date. And of course, in the city of Lakewood, most of the construction happened before it was ever incorporated, but there has been, particularly in the higher density zones, activity, and it's picking up as we speak. And that over time will change the maximum density. But as of today, what you see is that none of the zones, none of the designations are at maximum density. And if you start to look at mixed residential, multifamily, high density, multifamily, all of those are half or below the capacity that's within that
Mr.
zone.
Wageman.
This is based, your algorithm is built totally on area, right? Land area?
This is looking at the parcels and whether or not there's a home or a housing unit on it.
But there's other critical factors.
Absolutely, yes,
You know, I mean, because just infrastructure like roads.
correct.
You know, to have the right road to be able to move those kind of people. Certainly looking at the water district, I mean, when you start putting these things, do we have enough capacity
Correct.
to boost those kind of things? So when people start asking these questions, it gets a little fearful in a way. I mean, certainly we've agreed to support the Growth Management Act, but, you know.
You're one slide ahead of me.
Oh, sorry, I'll be quiet
That's
then.
okay. That's all right. But this is just the pure numbers, showing you in terms of density and in terms of how it's been built out over time, where each one of the zones within the city sits right now. Issues affecting densification. So Lakewood is a jurisdiction in part because of when it incorporated, but most, if not all, of the utilities are not owned by the city. So it's not something that can be comprehensively planned for, unlike other jurisdictions that do own their water, power, sewer. There are environmental constraints. So the lakes, of course, and then the wetlands associated with them, the hills and gulches and that sort of thing that are within parts of the city. The fact that you do have infrastructure already built out within certain patterns, you have the size of roads that maybe in theory this is an area that you could densify, but if you did, the road wouldn't be able to handle the additional traffic. Or it's a one-way road right now, and to try to make it two-way, there's just not enough space. So those types of things as well. There's, in those zones where you see the, in some cases, minority percentage built out, there's also where is the building that is there on a lot. Can it be moved? No. So what would you have to do? You'd have to redevelop altogether in order to densify over time. So there's a lot of existing status quo that would slow or restrict the way these various areas of the city can densify. Within the military districts, of course, there's also constraints based on federal guidance and what the city is now doing with its zoning and land use to comply with that. And then, of course, the one that applies everywhere across the board is resident resistance. So if the council were to suggest we're going to rezone something twice as dense as it is right now, you can imagine there would be some negative response to that. So that's obviously an extreme example, but the theory applies. So again, the number that you see here is based on what's on the ground, what's happened over time, but there's a lot of reasons why behind that. Dave, did you want to say something? Sorry, I thought you had your hand up.
I would just say that anytime there is a short plat or a long plat that's proposed, it is always opposed by the surrounding neighborhood. So we always have significant issues when we're doing infill development beyond just the infrastructure. So to suggest that infill is easy, it's not, and it requires a lot of work.
Yeah, the commissioners, we've, had public hearings many times, and, that last statement should be up at the top,
At the top,
number
yeah.
one, because it's okay somewhere else, but I've said this before, but not in my neighborhood, go put it over there, not in my neighborhood, so.
So this is just kind of the concluding slide, which is information you already have, but there is enough land zoned for both housing and job growth as targeted through 2050 and beyond. Lakewood has not developed to date at the maximum densities that are allowed currently within its residential zones. And then looking into the future and how the redevelopment may occur, or if something were to be changed into some of these residential zones from something that it is right now, there's going to be development restraints and constraints that may slow the densification that's desired. And that's all.
Mr. Pearson, go ahead.
So have you tracked over time those percentages? And I mean, are they pretty stationary at 88% and 33? I mean, are they over the past 5 years, has it gone from 25 to 33 or 32 to 33? I mean,
Let Mr. Buer answer that.
how do you project that up through the 2050? Is that?
Well, it hasn't been projected all the way up to 2050, but I can say the single-family zones, R1, R2, R3, R4, have been pretty stable. Where we're beginning to see some change is with multifamily development. We used to see density at between 18 to 22 units per acre. It's beginning to climb somewhat to 32 to 38, but that's substantially still much lower than our maximums allowed. In other urban areas, that would be actually medium density, not high density. So we are affected by the market, and many times the cost of putting in the multifamily with multiple stories doesn't justify, in this area, the higher density. And so that's an issue.
Thanks.
And I think you'll see some changes over time in the downtown with the downtown plan, which is, this is where the city's proposing a good portion of its infrastructure in the future at 100 units per acre. We may see a project soon on the horizon that proposes something not quite to 100 units, but something a little bit more than what we've seen in the past.
Any other questions for Mrs. Spear? Yes, Mr. Wageman.
I guess, so this really has a key coming back to what's the vision for our community? How do we decide what that is? Because when you start talking about jobs, depending on what kind of jobs you bring in, how much space do they take? So that takes away land from residential. How do you decide that? Or who,
Ultimately, the council's going to set that policy through the comprehensive plan and how it maps things. Go ahead, Mr. Buer.
Well, I was going to say technology and business activities change. And where before you had maybe low numbers of employees per acre in industrial parks, you could very well see some changes there where the number of employees go up because the use types and what the market's requesting is changing. So you could see a densification in some of the industrial zones. Some of the things we're kind of monitoring is, the production of food. There's experiments going down in California right now where you do massive warehouses, and that's where the food is produced using robots. And you don't have to use all different kinds of pesticides and herbicides, and you control your personnel costs because you're using machines, and then you're using other types of electrical things that reduce your power output. So that's being studied, and if you put that in combination with, for example, the very large refrigeration unit you see in Tacoma, where they reduced the amount of air inside the facility to preserve the food, I think you're going to see sort of these kinds of combinations are a possibility of that occurring. So that's something to kind of watch in industrial parks in the future. But we're still at the, in my opinion, for the more newer parks, it's sort of the first tier. But you know, you might see some changes in the Lakewood Industrial Park and at some point, because it's been around a lot longer, it's more established. And it's up to them, of course. But those things can change.
Any other questions for Ms. Spear? Hearing or seeing none. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. All right, let's go back to our agenda. So we go by Mr. Branstetter. Any reports from Mr. Branstetter tonight?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioner. Just a couple of things to bring to your attention. We've moved through the inform people stage regarding the sign code, and we've moved into a compliance required stage. I think probably the most significant change you would see is a significant reduction in the feather banners along major arterials, which was one of the priorities that folks look to do, to actually make a change and make a statement that there is a new code and it's going to start to be enforced to do that. But that other aspects of the code, that because we are in the season for elections and and that, quite frankly, the restrictions on temporary signs were lessened significantly. We haven't really seen a lot of change because people have just tended to do what they've done in the past and are still complying. So even though larger signs would be allowed and more of them, the density is not significantly different to be able to go and do that. The other area that the city is working collaboratively or offering to work collaboratively is there are lots of ideas about from DSHS and Olympia about what could happen at the current site of the Western State Hospital. It's sometimes unclear as to exactly what exactly they want or intend to happen. The city's view is that there still needs to be a master plan for the site before you begin to do anything significant, and I think that right now on the part of the state agencies, it's more of having ideas about what they want to do, but not so much of a commitment to process to get there. So that's something that we'll be looking for to do that. We are in a window of where private landowners can submit their requests for changes to the comprehensive plan or zoning changes and things to do that for the 2020 cycle. I don't have any information about what's been received or how much, so I can't assure you that you're going to have an easy year or warn you that you're going to have a busy one. That process, as you've worked to change the timeframes of the process so that it didn't get, like this year, we were able to take action in a mid-year instead of at the end of the year, as it was the case for many years. And it got crowded with all the things that had to be done by December 31st. I think that this year is actually the full transition to the new calendar of how you can apply and how things will be considered and how things will then show up on the agendas for the Planning Commission as well as for the City Council at times where they're not crowded with a lot of other things like budgets and such, to be able to go and do that. So, we have gotten the 2050 information that Ms. Spear gave you today is a tip of the iceberg of the work that staff has done to try to provide Lakewood input into what the 2050 vision document from the Puget Sound Regional Council eventually says, which is going to generate into some of those targets. And not just for Lakewood, but for targets across all 4 counties in the Puget Sound region. And the general theme of Lakewood and of communities in Pierce County has been that they want targets to align to say, if you're going to get population, you're also going to get jobs. And that other counties who are planning to get jobs need to be given goals to also get population. Exactly how you word that and do that, there's input going from, like I said, Lakewood has sent a letter, but collectively Pierce County, the Puget Sound, or the Pierce County Regional Council is sending a letter, and we're on the theme of trying to really get to think that where we have greater number of people that don't have to commute between counties or are for significant distance within a county to do that. I think building the Puget Sound Regional Council Vision 2050, it's one of those sausage-making projects of where there's a lot going in, and you're not quite sure exactly what's going to come out yet. But that we are working hard so that Lakewood's views of what the vision should be and how that should be done within the region are communicated, and that they're consistent with our vision for our own community, okay? That we are not going to be pushed in directions where we want to go. I would just make one last comment that there had been some discussions at the council that hasn't manifested itself in any specific recommendations or anything regarding some of the charts you saw about densification. And that really was taking a look at, do we have some zoning areas where we have specific minimum lot sizes, and are those square footage figures right? Okay, could that be done? You know, you could still have an R1 zone or an R4 zone, but maybe the lot size doesn't have to be what it is currently. I think long-term, the council is committed to looking at that, but I don't think we're looking to rush into it. We're kind of waiting to see what sort of targets and goals we're giving, but it's also one of the things, as Wagaman mentioned, if we start to try to designate lands where that are going to be places where jobs are going to occur, and that means that there's going to be some loss of lands where it's currently residential. And that's happened in the Woodbrook area. You know, some of the area that was zoned a number of years ago is Woodbrook, but it's not only residential land that gets rezoned to make room for business, but it's public institutional land, as has happened. So that balance is there, and the work that staff is doing on the buildable lands report and the data that supports it, okay, so that we're not just doing a report, but that the report is useful information to make decisions going forward is something that we're looking forward to. And I'd be glad to answer any questions about any rumors about what the council's been up to or anything.
No, I will just make a comment regarding when you give the update of the sign. I was apprehensive on your information period and then the enforcement period of some of those. I was apprehensive, but I have noticed considerably the amount of these feather banners that are no longer out within the city. It's very noticeable. So I have to give the staff a little bit more credit because I didn't think it was going to work of a long grace period and then try to go out there. But we'll see how it goes. And but it's noticeable difference of not seeing all those feather banners. So I think that's good. You can report back to that. Any other questions for Mr.?
Well, I'll make one comment on the signs is that when the city first incorporated, one of the things they said, hey, be careful where you put signs. We don't want posters on our power poles and all those kind of things. And I've really admired it. It's been really good. And then here in this last 6 months or a year, there's people that are getting that haven't got the word. We got most people moving in. I've seen stuff stapled to power poles again. So we're working the sign thing, but all of a sudden we're letting something that seemed to be working pretty well slip. Maybe I don't know what's happening there.
I can say that in the matter of temporary signs being put up on utility poles and that are, I think that maybe as we are working to get the major portions of the sign code enforced, that we're not looking to do that. That's also a very difficult thing to enforce and be able to go and do that. I mean, you can send somebody around to tear them all down, but it's really not the sort of thing that the municipal court judge is going to want to see you giving and looking at the phone number and then tracking down the person to give them an infraction to be able to go and do that. And so it's a problem. I know that one of the issues that citizens have brought to me is that some of the utility poles at intersections have become dangerous because they have so many nails and staples and other things that if you lean against them, you can, or brush against them, you can get cut and be able to do that because there have been so many signs that put up and torn down and be able to do that. I think there will be a time when there becomes enforcement emphasis on that issue. I couldn't tell you when, and then it'll get publicized that happened, and then we'll see a longer-term effect of people being, more compliant with what it is. But acknowledge it's a problem, but I also acknowledge that it's not a priority right now.
Any other questions for Mr. Brunswick? All right, staff, you have some?
Just a couple of things on the utility poles. Right now, it's not a priority. I know the code officers have been spending a considerable amount of time on homeless encampments. So that takes a major effort on the part of the CSRT team to go out and take care of it. So I just point that out. We do have about 5 or 6 city-initiated comprehensive plan amendments that we'll be bringing forward to the Planning Commission here soon. And a couple of things on the state side that we're monitoring. One is the state's talking about allowing marijuana medical deliveries to homes. And right now, the city of Lakewood prohibits medical marijuana and marijuana overall. So that's something that we're monitoring. The other issue is a DSHS topic, and that is having to do with essential services facilities. This thing has been in operation for many years, and there's only 4. They want more. And so they'll be looking at changing regulations to see if they can't place these in residential zones. So those are topics that the city is monitoring on its legislative level. That's something that's coming to the city council here pretty soon in September as a part of a retreat, but I wanted to give you an idea of what's sort of happening at that level. Unless Tiffany has anything else?
One question I did have, Dave, what was the abbreviation or the name of the homes that were for nonprofits that had, battered women and those things? You said there was.
Those are group homes in general?
What was there was a aid, what did you, there was a abbreviation, wasn't there?
We have different gradations of group homes in our code. I can't remember.
What's the accessory dwelling unit?
Oh, accessory dwelling unit, okay.
What's that? Is that what it is? What?
Mother-in-law apartment.
Mother-in-law type unit.
Okay. So I was just trying to find, after you mentioned it last week with your recap, I was trying to find it in the 464 pages to see the 15, the up to 15 individuals or 10 or 12, so. Special needs shelter. Special needs shelter, oh.
The accessory dwelling unit term applies to basically a second housing unit, whether it's attached or detached to the main home on a single lot. So it might be an apartment over the garage, it might be a separate entrance on the house, it might be a little cottage in the backyard. It's not necessarily any sort of shelter, it's just another residential use within the city.
We do have one existing group home with 3 families living in it, 4 battered females with their children. And it is monitored by CSRT. It is not prohibited in the city of Lakewood. And they have a significant number of attorneys that monitor their operations to make sure that we don't do something. And the neighbors complain all the time.
Yeah, it was just the question about the maximum amount allowed.
That's one of the questions that Mr. Guerrero has asked as a part of this update. We'll go back and take a look at that.
Okay.
But those are pretty tough to deal with.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So,
And it's hard to monitor.
yep, I do. Any other questions by staff?
I think Tiffany has something.
Well, just very quickly, in terms of your next couple of meetings.
Yes.
Next time, so you have continued your public hearing, so there may be some additional comments either in writing or in person that evening, and so that will conclude presumably, and then you'll be given plenty of time that night to ask questions, to suggest edits or amendments. So that'll be an evening for that, and then we will be introducing to you the 2020 Comprehensive Plan Amendment docket. Next Friday's the deadline for submitting applications for that, and then we'll get that to you the following week, so you can start to see what may be coming toward you. So far, we've only had, I think, 2 privately initiated applications come in. We'll see if more come next week. Otherwise, it looks like it's going to be mostly coming from the city this time around. Then on October 2nd, at this point, you may be taking action on 18A if you feel ready to do so. There'll be a public hearing on that 2020 Comprehensive Plan docket, And then October 16th would be when you would be taking action on that docket and sending it forward to council.
But we do have a public hearing for September 18th on the,
Oh, I'm sorry,
rezone?
yes, I'm sorry, the rezone of the 6 parcels where Fort Steilacoom Golf Course used to be, my apologies.
Okay, great, thank you. So those that look at your schedule for the 18th, since it is a public hearing, it's been posted, make sure your calendars are free, where we at least have 4 of us for a quorum.
And we have received comments from both DSHS and from adjoining single-family homeowners. So I'm expecting some people to be in attendance that evening.
Okay, great. Hearing no other comments or questions? Mr. Wegeman?
October 2nd, I'm just, heads up, I'm not going to be available on October 2nd.
No problem, thank you. Karen will make a note of that, excused already. Okay, hearing none at this time, we'll call the meeting adjourned.